Why should you care about deepfakes in movies and television? Now, I get the sense that most people agree with me on the surface level fact that deepfakes are no good, mainly because they look like crap. But on this issue, I am a radical. I think deepfakes are so much worse than you realize. And little of it has to do with how good they look. I'm going to explain why I think you should be as troubled as I am by deepfakes, why they're bad for reasons that go well beyond movies and TV. I mean, we know that AI images get better all the time and that they can even fool like media literate people, but they are just going to get so much better, so much more convincing, and video is not far behind. That's very far beyond the scope of the discussion I'm going to have. I'm going to limit it to movies and TV, but just know this is an enormous topic. Like, there are going to be graduate level seminars in philosophy taught about this subject because it is a question of how we understand reality. It's a media literacy story. It's a political story. It's an economic story. It raises huge ethical questions about bodily autonomy. So again, I'm going to try not to get super bogged down in all the tendrils of the deepfake question. I'm going to instead raise three general objections to deepfakes: the ethical objection, the labor objection, and the artistic objection. And then I'll briefly go over what, if anything, we can do about all of this. So I have to start by even defining what I mean by deepfake. I'm using it as a general term to stand in for basically any digital recreation of a person's likeness, meaning their body and their voice, when that person is not present, usually, but not always, because they're dead. The most prominent use has been in the Star Wars franchise. In 2016, the movie Rogue One used deepfakes of two actors. Peter Cushing as Grand Moff Tarkin is featured really prominently throughout the movie, and Peter Cushing had been dead at that point for 22 years. Also, a deepfake of Carrie Fisher appears as Princess Leia, and though Carrie Fisher died really shortly after the movie was released, she was alive at the time. She was acting in Star Wars movies at the time. She could theoretically have been present on set, and they could have just de-aged her, but that's not what they did. Instead, they just took archival footage of her and inserted it into the movie. And then de-aging is a separate but related thing. My issues with de-aging are less substantial because it usually involves that actor actually being present and giving a performance in their own body and then having their image cosmetically altered. I don't like it, but I'm certainly not as troubled by it. Okay, so deepfakes are a thing that have emerged really only in the past 10 years, but there has been concern about them or about things like them for much longer than that. In 1997, there was a Dirt Devil vacuum cleaner, a series of commercials that featured Fred Astaire dancing with Dirt Devil vacuums. And Fred Astaire had been dead for 10 years at that point. But there were sequences in his movies where he danced with inanimate objects like mops. So they take the dance sequence of Astaire dancing with the mop, they replace the mop with the vacuum, and then they put it in a commercial. It makes it look like Fred Astaire is happy to dance with this Dirt Devil. And the company that made these commercials, made Dirt Devil, they made a deal with Fred Astaire's widow, so she gave her permission, but these commercials received a huge amount of backlash, and critics were basically worried about what does this portend about our future where dead celebrities are constantly selling products to us on TV, and what are we doing to these legends? The company, again, had received permission from Fred Astaire's widow, but his daughter, Ava Astaire, was very public in saying that her father would never have wanted this. He was an artist. He was not a salesman. And so that brings us to objection number one, the ethical objection, which is when a person is dead, who, if anyone, has the right to decide what is done with their likeness? In the case of Fred Astaire, it was his widow, Robin, who had the authority to decide what to do with his likeness, but then his daughter disagreed with her decision, with the decision that her stepmother had made. So, who has the more valid claim on Fred Astaire's likeness? He was only married to Robin for 7 years. He had been a father to Ava for 45 years, and these two people have a disagreement about what he would have wanted. There's a very prominent recent example of a movie using a deepfake, and I'm just not going to reveal the movie because it's a spoiler, but in the case of that movie, the studio got permission from this dead actor's family, and I think, a case can be made that nobody actually has the ethical authority to authorize this. I believe in bodily autonomy. I believe our bodies belong to ourselves. And so even if we give permission to somebody else to use our bodies, we reserve the right in perpetuity to remove the position. I can give you permission to use my body, but I have forevermore the right to take that permission away. And when a person is dead, they don't have that ability. We can trust loved ones to speak for us, but to me, the thing that matters the most is that the dead actor isn't around anymore to take away their permission. And digital likeness is forever. So like that to me is a decision way too big for anyone but the actual person to make, even if, they trust their spouse or whoever it is implicitly to make their decisions on their behalf. In the instance of Christopher Reeve in 2023's movie The Flash, he was inserted into The Flash and his family declared they had no involvement with that decision. Now, Reeve in this instance was not deepfaked. It was just existing footage of Christopher Reeve as Superman inserted into the new movie. But let's say that Warner Brothers did decide to make a movie where they deepfake Christopher Reeve, and that they had received permission from his family to do so. They received permission. How seriously should we even take that permission? Like Christopher Reeve died in 2004. How much can we trust that, he had a conversation or that he was able to make his family understand how he would feel about this in a hypothetical future where he can be doing and saying things on screen that he never did or say? Like, what is permission actually worth? Then actors are like going to need to consider doing things like deepfake DNRs, basically. Like you need to like write out an affidavit saying very clearly what they want done with their likeness once they're gone, and then trust that movie studios, if they want to use your likeness, they're going to do everything they can to work around this. But that leads me to objection number 2, which is the labor objection. So the SAG-AFTRA strikes of last year of 2023 involved deepfakes as a negotiating point, and the unions were able to score some victories on this front. But technology moves much faster than law. Moves much faster than contract law in particular. And you can count on big business finding a way around any and all laws and any and all contract language. So let's set aside that specific legal restrictions that might exist right now and just focus on the underlying issue. Okay, the issue is this. Deepfakes take away jobs from other actors, plain and simple. So it is a labor question. And more than that, they are basically a form of pulling the ladder up from aspiring, from up and coming actors. And in the past few years, it seems like Hollywood has finally started to start developing new young movie stars who are just a little more diverse than the prior generation of movie stars. At least there are a few of them. And yet, still, the biggest movie stars in the world are names like Tom Cruise, Will Smith, Robert Downey Jr., Sandra Bullock, actors who came up in the 80s and 90s. Those stars aren't going to be around forever. They're going to get old or they're going to die. But what if they don't? What if we don't need them to even be alive? Maybe deepfake technology right now is not at a place where it can adequately produce a lead movie star performance, but that day is coming. And when that happens, what need is there going to be for Hollywood to develop new stars when it can just recreate all of your favorites from the past? Like, why have Kaylee Spaney in the new Alien film when you can just recreate a young Sigourney Weaver? And so this will mean way fewer roles for aspiring actors. And since movie stars of the past were much, whiter and maler than the public at large, this means diverse representation on screen is going to get much worse if we're just using deepfakes of the beloved stars of the past. The reason all of this is happening is because of labor. So I read a lot of history, a lot of books about history of the movie industry, and a constant from the very beginning is that studio execs hate, more than anything, they absolutely hate having to share profits. An example, in 2007, Sony Pictures had the biggest hit of the year in Spider-Man 3, but Sony Pictures was miserable about this because Sam Raimi and Tobey Maguire had escalating contracts with each Spider-Man movie they made, which meant that they got a bigger share of the profits for Spider-Man 3. So Spider-Man 3 makes more money than Spider-Man 2, but Sony keeps less of the profits than they did with Spider-Man 2. And this makes them miserable. And if you want to learn more about this, I recommend a book by Ben Fritz called The Big Picture, which does a great job detailing this. Similarly, like 2022, Paramount Pictures had the biggest hit in the history of their 100-year-old studio in Top Gun Maverick. You would think they'd be over the moon, but no, they're miserable because that pesky Tom Cruise has profit participation. So they have to give a lot of money over to him. And you get the sense that to these studios, even though Spider-Man 3 wouldn't exist if it were not for Tobey Maguire and Sam Raimi. Top Gun Maverick would not exist if it were not for Tom Cruise, and you wouldn't have made any money at all. They'd rather make no money at all than make money and have to share it. And so You know who you don't have to share money with is a dead person. And also the dead person, the dead actors, they don't need assistants, they don't need trailers, they don't need profit participation, and they don't need to join a labor union, because the person who's actually making the performance happen is just usually a contract laborer working on a computer. And this, I think, is what it's all about ultimately. My grand unifying theory that explains recent entertainment history is all about the studios taking back control. And it explains, I think, the pivot to streaming. Like Top Gun Maverick was an enormous hit in theaters. And as a result, Tom Cruise knows his value. He knows how much he's worth to Paramount Pictures. But if it had instead debuted on Paramount Plus, nobody would have any idea if it's a hit or not. I mean, the studio would know, but they're not going to tell. And then the labor class of Hollywood, which even includes megastars like Tom Cruise, they lose their leverage. And this is all about hoarding as much leverage as you possibly can. All of this, I'm talking about movie stars, but way more than movie stars, it's going to affect, lower level people. It's going to affect supporting actors and extras. Objection number 3 is especially bleak. I would call it the artistic objection. And I became radicalized against deepfakes when I learned about how Star Wars deepfaked Mark Hamill on The Mandalorian and on the Book of Boba Fett. Now, on The Mandalorian, Hamill was at least present on set during the production of his scenes, and then he was digitally de-aged. But the effect looked so bad, they were made fun of, mocked, that Disney went another direction when he appeared later on the Book of Boba Fett. And so they didn't have Hamill present at all. Instead, they just totally digitally rendered him without Hamill being present. But what really bothered me is in both of these cases, Mark Hamill's voice was not used at all. Instead, basically, a computer program ingested all of Mark Hamill's dialogue from the original Star Wars movies, and then somebody typed the words, and then it spat out what Mark Hamill would have sounded like saying those things. And this is despite the fact that Mark Hamill is a Disney employee and one of the great voice actors of all time. Don't bother using him to play this character he has played for 50 years. We'll just have the computer do it. And here's why I find this so disgusting. I've mentioned acting as a job earlier, as a labor, but it's also an art. And more than anything, artists make choices. Mark Hamill, he's inhabited the character of Luke Skywalker for 50 years. He makes choices about the character. He makes choices about how each line is delivered, how each word is said, every facial expression, every movement. And just as important, maybe more important, he interacts with other people, and the feedback loop of performance against performance create something much bigger, something much more powerful. This is acting fundamentally, going all the way back to friggin' ancient Greece, just people on stage acting and reacting against each other. And I think that the entertainment industry thinks that viewers, that fans don't care about this, that they think that all we actually want is for actors on screen to just, or characters on screen, just deliver us information, just say words at us. Now, I don't think that's true. I think people care about acting. I think even if they may not think they do, they want good performances. That's what sticks with us at the end of the day. But I'm afraid more and more movies and TV shows are going to use deepfakes. They're going to be filled up with fake actors giving non-acting performances, and we just have to accept it. And like deepfaking will evolve into its own craft, deepfakes will give good performances the same way animated characters can give good performances. But it is a poor substitute for human beings being present with each other, living with their characters, building their characters, and acting against each other to inform their characters and how their characters act. And when we lose this, it's just going to be a tremendous loss for the art of movies and television. Afterward, what can we do? Talked about all this bleak shit. Is there anything we can do if we don't want deepfakes in our movies and TV shows? Well, one of the most useful words that has emerged in the past few years is in-shitification, which describes the feeling that we all have that all the products and all the services we use just seem to get shittier and shittier. And, you buy an iPhone and after a few months, it no longer holds a charge. So you're like, I guess I better get another iPhone. I mean, free market capitalism, at least in theory, would suggest that the market would correct for this, that people would stop buying iPhones. They'd switch to a competitor. But we all know that doesn't happen. The opportunity cost of switching to Android is too high. And we have so much invested in Apple. We have our data with Apple, and we don't want to be the green bubble in the text thread. But more than that, we don't have the time to learn new things, like we know how to use an iPhone. We don't know how to use an Android. So we just swallow it. We pay the money for the new iPhone, and we just live our lives, and they just get shittier and shittier each year, and we just accept it. Movies are going to get shittier because they're going to have deep fake actors in them, and we're going to keep seeing movies because we still want to see movies. What choice do we have? To the movie studios, this will look like audiences approve of deep fakes because they keep going to the movies. If they didn't like deep fakes, why would they keep coming to the movies? But that's not the choice that consumers are making. People still want to see the movies. It's not a simple choice of boycotting movies with deep fakes because, in the case of that notable movie recently that had a deep fake actor, I saw it opening day. There was no indication in the marketing that there would be a deepfake in it, so I couldn't make an informed decision about whether I wanted to support the movie with my money. Had I known there were a deepfake, I would not have supported the movie with my money. I know that most people aren't going to make that choice, and I understand that. You still want to see the movie, even if you don't like that there's a deepfake in it. I'm not going to spend my money on that particular movie in the future. Like, I definitely would have bought that movie on 4K, but I'm not going to be doing that. But the movie studio is not going to give a shit about that, particularly when they are determined to push through this deepfake thing, because again, it's in their long-term financial interest to do it. It will be more profitable for them to be working with fake actors over real actors. So what do we do about this? One thing we can do is exactly what I'm doing, which is just make noise, just complain. And studios, they actually do care about this. They do care about fan backlash, I think often to their detriment. But here's a case where we can use the power of fan anger for good. To convince them to stop doing this bullshit. But much more effective and much more important is that the frontline soldiers in this battle are the labor unions, or the Hollywood labor unions, and they are fighting the good fight against deepfakes. And so it is our job, if we're not in the entertainment industry, to support and stand in solidarity with the labor unions. For example, last week, SAG-AFTRA struck a deal that would allow actors to sell their rights to advertisers to digitally recreate their voices. Basically, there's a company that can ingest your voice and digitally recreate it. And so they've set out a sort of regulatory scheme where actors can decide if they want to do this or decide they don't want to do this. And if they do it, they get compensated for it. That is how it should be, because it is ultimately about bodily autonomy. It is about the person whose voice is being utilized to make the decision about what they want to happen with it. And if it happens, they need to be paid for it. Unions, they're really our best hope. I don't have any confidence in Congress or the courts to keep up with updating laws to accommodate current technology, much less to go against the interests of big business. And again, it's in the interest of big business to use as many deepfakes as they can. Otherwise, all we can do is complain. A generation of audiences is going to grow up after us that mostly knows fake actors, or at least this is the bleak future I envision. And when that happens, there are going to be people like me who are complaining. They miss the time when there were real people in movies, and we are going to seem like old cranks, but that's okay. I don't mind being the old man who yells at the clouds if the clouds are bullshit.